I'm Olivia Reynolds, 29, and I never expected my sister's engagement party to end with my entire family on their knees, desperately apologizing. For years, they'd dismissed my relationship as imaginary, my fiancé as a convenient fiction, until that helicopter descended onto the country club lawn, and the man they'd mocked as my fake boyfriend stepped out. The look on my mother's face alone was worth every second of the humiliation they'd put me through. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock, it arrives with rotor blades and a man worth waiting for. Before I dive into this wild family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you team helicopter entrance, or would you have handled things differently? Hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you've ever fantasized about proving your family wrong in spectacular fashion. Now, let's get into how my family's skepticism about my relationship led to the most satisfying moment of sweet justice I've ever experienced. Growing up in the affluent suburb of Greenwich, Connecticut, I was always the black sheep of the Reynolds family. While my sister Madison excelled in everything she touched, valedictorian homecoming queen, and now a successful corporate attorney, I chose a different path. After college, I pursued my passion for wildlife photography, which meant extensive travel to remote locations. My parents, both high-powered executives, who valued stability and social status above all else, never quite understood my choices. "When are you going to get a real job?" Olivia became my mother Caroline's standard greeting whenever I returned home. My father Robert, the CEO of a finance firm, would simply sigh and retreat behind his newspaper, a wordless expression of his disappointment. Madison, always eager to maintain her golden child status, would smirk from across the dinner table. It was during one of my expeditions to Alaska 2 years ago that I met Nathan. He was piloting a small research helicopter transporting scientists to study glacial formations. Our connection was immediate and profound. Nathan was everything my family wasn't: adventurous, authentic, and completely uninterested in social hierarchies. He owned a successful aviation company that specialized in difficult terrain operations, but he still flew missions himself because he loved the freedom of the skies. Our relationship developed rapidly despite the distance. When we weren't together physically, we spent hours on video calls. Nathan understood my passion for photography in a way no one else had. He even helped me secure contracts with prestigious nature magazines by flying me to locations inaccessible to most photographers. When he proposed after a year of dating on a mountain summit at sunrise, saying yes was the easiest decision of my life. The problems began when I started mentioning Nathan to my family. Since they had never met him due to our busy opposing schedules, a strange narrative began to form in the Reynolds household. It started with subtle comments from Madison. "It's convenient that your boyfriend is always too busy to meet us," she remarked during a family dinner. "Does he actually exist, or is he just an excuse to avoid bringing someone home?" Instead of defending me, my mother latched onto this idea. "You know, Olivia has always had an active imagination. Remember her imaginary friend in elementary school? What was his name?" "Skylar." "It was Skylar," I corrected, gritting my teeth. "And Nathan is very real. His work schedule is unpredictable, just like mine." My father lowered his newspaper just enough to make eye contact with me. "Well, I'd like to meet this mysterious helicopter pilot someday. If he's real, of course." That was the first time they openly questioned Nathan's existence, but it wouldn't be the last. With each visit home, the fake fiancé narrative grew stronger. They began referring to Nathan as my Alaska imagination, a cruel joke that Madison particularly enjoyed. What hurt most was how quickly my parents accepted this fiction, rather than believing their own daughter. The situation reached a breaking point when Madison announced her engagement to Bradley, a fellow attorney from her firm. Bradley came from the right family, attended the right schools, and checked all the boxes my parents valued. The contrast between the celebration of Madison's relationship and the mockery of mine became unbearable. "We're having an engagement party at the Greenfield Country Club next month," Madison announced during Sunday brunch. "Of course, Olivia, you're welcome to bring your— what do you call him again, Nathan?" She exchanged knowing looks with our parents. I felt my cheeks burning with anger and humiliation. "Yes, Nathan. My fiancé. The man I'm going to marry." My mother patted my hand condescendingly. "Honey, you don't have to keep up this charade. We understand that seeing Madison settle down might make you feel inadequate." That was the moment I decided enough was enough. It was time for my family to meet Nathan, and I would make sure it was an introduction they would never forget. The moment I left my parents' house after that humiliating brunch, I called Nathan. Despite the frustration making my voice shake, I managed to explain everything that had happened with my family. Nathan listened quietly, something he always did when processing intense information. When I finished venting, his response surprised me. "Let them believe what they want," he said calmly. "People like your family only understand grand gestures. If they want to see me, they'll see me, but on our terms." That's when the plan began to take shape. Nathan suggested something so audacious that it initially seemed ridiculous. He would arrive at Madison's engagement party in his company's flagship helicopter. Not just any helicopter, but the sleek black Airbus H130 with the Skyhawk Aviation logo emblazoned on the side, the same one featured in last month's issue of Aviation Weekly with Nathan on the cover. "Isn't that a bit excessive?" I asked, though I couldn't suppress a smile at the image. "Your family has been calling me a figment of your imagination for 2 years," Nathan replied. "Subtlety isn't going to cut it at this point." Over the next few weeks, our plan evolved from a simple dramatic entrance into something more elaborate. Nathan contacted the country club's management, securing the necessary permissions for a helicopter landing on their auxiliary field, typically used for the club's own small aircraft. As the CEO of Skyhawk Aviation, doors opened easily for him, something my status-conscious family would certainly appreciate. I decided to play along with my family's delusion in the meantime. Whenever Madison or my parents asked if Nathan would attend the engagement party, I gave vague responses that reinforced their belief that he wasn't real. "He'll try his best to be there," I would say with a deliberately unconvincing smile. "Of course he will," my mother would respond with a knowing wink to my father. Madison took particular delight in my apparent discomfort, even going so far as to schedule a singles table at her engagement party and assigning me a seat there. "Just in case your fiancé doesn't materialize," she explained with mock concern. What my family didn't know was that Nathan had rearranged his entire schedule to ensure he could make a grand entrance. He postponed a major contract signing in Seattle and delegated several important flights to his senior pilots. This party had become more than just an introduction. It was about standing up to years of belittlement and disbelief. 2 days before the party, Nathan flew into a private airfield about 30 miles from Greenwich. He stayed at a hotel rather than coming directly to my apartment, all to preserve the impact of his arrival. We finalized every detail of our plan during a secretive dinner at an out-of-the-way restaurant where we wouldn't risk running into anyone from my family's social circle. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Nathan asked as we finished our meal. "It's your family after all." I considered his question seriously. Part of me felt guilty about planning such a theatrical display at Madison's event. But then I remembered the years of dismissive comments, the condescending looks, and the persistent refusal to believe that someone could genuinely love me for who I was, rather than what I represented socially. "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "They've had countless opportunities to meet you normally, to believe me, to show even the slightest respect for my life choices. Instead, they turned my relationship into a family joke. They need to understand that my life is real even if it doesn't fit their narrow expectations." Nathan nodded, understanding the weight of my decision. "Then we'll give them a show they'll never forget." The night before the party, I could barely sleep. Anxiety and anticipation coursed through me as I imagined all the possible outcomes of our plan. Would my family be angry, embarrassed? Would they finally recognize the reality of my relationship, or would they find some way to dismiss even this grand gesture? As dawn broke on the day of Madison's engagement party, I received a text from Nathan with a picture of the helicopter being prepared for flight, accompanied by 5 simple words. "Ready to change some minds today?" I smiled at my phone and replied, "Ready to change everything." The Greenfield Country Club was transformed for Madison's engagement party. Crystal chandeliers glittered above tables adorned with elaborate white and gold flower arrangements. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the grand ballroom, providing the perfect soundtrack for the wealthy attendees to network and congratulate the happy couple. This was exactly the kind of ostentatious display my parents lived for, a chance to parade their successful daughter and future son-in-law before their social circle. I arrived early dressed in a deep emerald gown that contrasted sharply with the sea of pastels most female guests wore. If I was going to be part of a dramatic scene, I wanted to look the part. Several of my parents' friends approached me with the same rehearsed questions. "Olivia, how lovely to see you home. Still taking pictures in the wilderness? Where is this fiancé of yours we've heard about? Couldn't make it again." Each question was delivered with the same knowing tone, making it clear that the imaginary fiancé rumor had spread throughout my parents' social circle. I responded with vague smiles and checked my watch, repeatedly counting down the minutes until Nathan's scheduled arrival at 2:30 p.m. Madison floated through the crowd in her designer dress, Bradley perpetually at her side, like a well-trained show dog. When she spotted me standing alone, she made a beeline in my direction, dragging her fiancé along. "Olivia, so glad you could make it," she gushed, with artificial enthusiasm. "This is Bradley, though of course you met at the announcement dinner. We're just so disappointed What was his name again? Nathan couldn't join us today." Bradley extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Madison tells me he's a helicopter pilot. Fascinating career choice." The way he said fascinating made it clear he found the idea of dating someone with such a practical, hands-on profession rather amusing. Before I could respond, my mother appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. "Olivia insists he's real," she stage whispered to Bradley, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "We're still waiting for proof." She laughed as though she'd made a particularly clever joke. I forced myself to remain calm, remembering that in less than an hour their smug certainty would crumble. "He'll be arriving a bit late," I said casually. "Had some transportation issues to work out." My father joined our little circle, clapping Bradley on the shoulder. "Transportation issues, eh? Isn't he supposed to be a pilot? You'd think he could figure that out." The group chuckled at my expense. I glanced at my phone. 2:15 p.m. Nathan had sent a message confirming he was taking off. 15 minutes until showtime. "Actually," I said, infusing my voice with confidence, "you might want to step onto the terrace around 2:30. You wouldn't want to miss his arrival." My mother rolled her eyes. "Oh, Olivia, enough with the theatrics. We all know he isn't coming." "Trust me," I replied with a smile. "You'll want to see this." For the next 15 minutes I endured more patronizing comments and pitying looks. A distant cousin patted my arm and whispered that she knew a lovely single accountant she could introduce me to. Madison's maid of honor loudly discussed how sad it was when women invented relationships to cope with loneliness. At exactly 2:28 p.m., I moved to the terrace doors and opened them wide. The sound of distant rotor blades became faintly audible, growing louder with each passing second. A few guests turned their heads in confusion, trying to identify the source of the noise. "What is that racket?" my mother demanded, irritation clear in her voice. I smiled serenely. That would be my fiancé arriving. The distinct chopping sound of helicopter blades grew louder until it was impossible to ignore. Guests began streaming onto the terrace, champagne flutes still in hand, as a sleek black helicopter appeared on the horizon, heading directly for the country club. The string quartet stopped playing, as everyone's attention shifted to the approaching aircraft. "This has to be a joke," Madison hissed her perfect engagement party, now thoroughly disrupted. "You hired a helicopter." I didn't bother responding as the Airbus H130, with the prominent Skyhawk Aviation logo, made a graceful approach to the auxiliary field adjacent to the main lawn. Even from this distance, I could see Nathan in the pilot's seat, his confident handling of the powerful machine evident in its precise movements. The helicopter settled onto the ground with barely a disturbance to the surrounding grass. The engine powered down, the rotor blades slowed, and then the passenger door opened. Nathan stepped out, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that did nothing to hide his athletic build. His blonde hair was slightly tousled from the helmet he'd just removed, giving him that effortlessly handsome look that had first caught my attention in Alaska. The crowd on the terrace had gone completely silent. My father's mouth hung slightly open, my mother clutched her pearls, and Madison looked as though someone had just told her that her designer dress was a counterfeit. The silence was broken only when Nathan began walking confidently across the lawn toward the clubhouse, a bouquet of rare Alaskan wildflowers in his hand. I made my way through the stunned crowd and down the terrace steps to meet him halfway. When we reached each other, he swept me into an embrace that left no doubt about the reality of our relationship. "Sorry, I'm late," he said loudly enough for those nearest to hear. "Traffic was a nightmare, so I had to take the helicopter." Several guests laughed nervously, unsure if this was some elaborate prank or performance arranged for the party. I took Nathan's hand and led him toward my family, who remained frozen in place at the edge of the terrace. "Mom, Dad, Madison," I said with calm satisfaction, "I'd like you to meet Nathan Hayes, my very real fiancé and the CEO of Skyhawk Aviation. Nathan, this is my family, the ones I told you so much about." The look of utter shock on their faces was everything I had hoped for and more. The silence that enveloped the terrace was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother was the first to recover, her social training kicking in despite her shock. She extended a trembling hand toward Nathan. "How lovely to finally meet you," she managed, her voice higher than usual. "What an entrance." Nathan shook her hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Reynolds. I've heard so much about you." His tone was perfectly polite, betraying none of the knowledge he had about how they'd treated me. My father stepped forward next, his CEO persona reasserting itself as he assessed Nathan with new eyes. "That's quite a machine you've got there," he said, gesturing toward the helicopter. "Hayes Aviation, was it?" "Skyhawk Aviation," Nathan corrected smoothly. "We specialize in difficult terrain operations and high-risk transportation. Currently operating a fleet of 15 helicopters and 5 fixed-wing aircraft across North America." I could almost see my father's mental calculator working as he processed the value of such a company. His expression shifted from skepticism to keen interest in the span of seconds. Madison and Bradley approached last, her face a mask of composure that couldn't quite hide her annoyance at having her engagement party upstaged. "So you're the mysterious fiancé," Madison said with forced lightness. "We were beginning to think Olivia had invented you." Nathan's smile remained perfectly pleasant, but I felt his hand tighten around mine. "I've been looking forward to meeting the family that Olivia has told me so much about. Congratulations on your engagement, by the way." He handed Madison the wildflower bouquet. "These are Arctic lupines and dwarf fireweed, some of Alaska's most resilient flowers. They thrive in conditions that would kill most plants." The symbolism wasn't lost on me, and from Madison's tight smile, it wasn't lost on her either. "How unusual," she replied, holding the bouquet, as if it might bite her. By now the entire party had gathered to witness this unexpected drama. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's Nathan Hayes. Skyhawk Aviation was in Aviation Weekly, worth millions. It seemed someone had already Googled him on their phone, and the information was spreading rapidly. My mother, ever attuned to shifting social winds, suddenly became effusively welcoming. Nathan, you simply must join us at the family table. We have so much catching up to do. Actually, I interjected, according to the seating chart, I'm at the singles table. I turned to Nathan with an apologetic smile. I'm afraid you weren't included in the arrangements. My mother's face flushed with embarrassment. Nonsense, that was clearly a mistake. We'll rearrange immediately. She snapped her fingers at a nearby server. Please set 2 more places at the family table. As we followed my parents back inside, Nathan leaned close to whisper in my ear, "Are you enjoying this?" Every second, I admitted. Once seated at the hastily rearranged family table, the interrogation began in earnest. My father peppered Nathan with questions about his business model, annual revenue, and expansion plans. My mother alternated between apologizing for the misunderstanding about his existence and probing for details about his family background. "And your parents, Nathan, what do they do?" she asked, clearly hoping for connections to exploit. "My father was a bush pilot in Alaska," Nathan replied. "He taught me to fly when I was 16. My mother runs a bed and breakfast in Anchorage. Simple people, but they gave me everything that matters." I could see my mother's estimation of him waver slightly at the lack of prestigious family connections, but his obvious success kept her from dismissing him outright. Throughout the meal, Madison made several attempts to reclaim the spotlight, announcing details about her upcoming wedding and honeymoon plans. But the guests' attention repeatedly drifted back to Nathan, particularly after someone mentioned his recent feature in Aviation Weekly. "Oh, that little piece," Nathan said modestly when asked. "They were more interested in our company's rescue operations during the avalanche season than in me personally." "Rescue operations?" one of the guests asked, intrigued. Nathan launched into a compelling story about coordinating emergency evacuations after a series of avalanches had cut off several remote communities. As he spoke, I watched my family's expressions shift from skepticism to reluctant admiration. His quiet confidence and evident competence were impossible to ignore even for them. When dessert was served, my father finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I have to ask Nathan, why haven't we met you before today? Olivia has mentioned you, of course, but 2 years is a long time to remain unseen." The table fell silent, all eyes on Nathan. This was the moment of truth, the question that would either diffuse the tension or ignite it further. Nathan set down his fork deliberately. "Mr. Reynolds, I've wanted to meet Olivia's family for quite some time. I've invited her to bring you all to Alaska, offered to fly down for holidays, and rearranged my schedule multiple times for planned visits." His voice remained calm but took on an edge of steel. Each time something seemed to come up. After a while, I began to wonder if perhaps I wasn't welcome. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "There must have been some miscommunication." "Actually," I interrupted, unable to contain myself any longer, "there was no miscommunication. You and Mom and Madison decided it was easier to believe I was lying about Nathan than to accept that my life choices could lead to happiness. You turned my relationship into a family joke. You called him my imaginary fiancé to my face and behind my back." The table fell completely silent. Even the surrounding conversation seemed to dim as guests sensed the confrontation brewing. "Olivia, this is hardly the time or place," my mother began. "When would be a better time, Mom? After you've had a chance to rewrite history and pretend you never doubted me, after you've convinced yourselves that you were always supportive." Madison interjected, her voice sharp. "You're making a scene at my engagement party." Typical Olivia, always trying to be the center of attention. Something inside me snapped. 2 years of dismissal, mockery, and condescension came pouring out. "This isn't about attention, Madison. It's about respect." It's about believing your own daughter when she tells you something. It's about not turning someone's relationship into a running family joke because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of success. Wait, I'm sure you're all wondering what happened next at this dramatic family showdown. Did my family apologize? Did things get even worse? Well, I hate to leave you hanging, but let's take a quick break to talk about this. Incredible community. I see we've got viewers from all over. Drop a comment letting me know if you've ever had family members who refuse to believe something important about your life. And if you're enjoying this roller coaster of family drama and sweet revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories like this one. Don't worry, I'll be right back with what happened when I finally confronted my family about their treatment of me and Nathan. The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Guests at nearby tables had stopped their conversations, sensing the tension radiating from our family gathering. My mother's face had turned a shade of red that clashed violently with her pastel dress, while my father looked as though he'd swallowed something particularly unpleasant. "Olivia," my father finally said, his voice low and controlled, "you're being irrational. No one meant any harm," with a few light-hearted comments. Nathan's hand found mine under the table, a silent gesture of support that gave me the strength to continue. "Light-hearted," I repeated incredulously. "You called my relationship a fantasy. You suggested I needed psychiatric help. You assigned me to the singles table at a family event because you were so convinced I was lying." There was nothing light-hearted about it. Madison leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the tablecloth. "This is my engagement party, Olivia. I won't let you turn it into your personal therapy session." "You're right," Nathan interjected, smoothly speaking, before I could retort. "This is your celebration, Madison, and we wouldn't want to overshadow it." He stood, pulling me gently to my feet alongside him. "Perhaps this conversation should happen another time when emotions aren't running quite so high." I was about to protest when I saw the look in his eyes. This wasn't surrender, it was strategic retreat. I nodded slightly, understanding his intention. "You're absolutely right, Nathan," my mother said, with obvious relief, her social mask slipping back into place. "We should focus on celebrating Madison and Bradley today. We can discuss any misunderstandings at a more appropriate time." Of course, I agreed, my voice honeyed with false sweetness. After all, family harmony is so important, isn't it? Almost as important as truth and respect. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we could all use some fresh air." "Nathan, I'd be very interested in taking a closer look at your helicopter if you wouldn't mind." It was a transparent attempt to separate us, to get Nathan alone where they could either interrogate him further or attempt to charm him without my interfering presence. Nathan, however, wasn't so easily manipulated. "I'd be happy to show you the H-130, sir," he replied pleasantly. "Olivia can give you the tour. She's logged enough hours in it to know its capabilities almost as well as I do." My father's eyebrows shot up. "Olivia flies helicopters, not solo yet," Nathan explained, "but she's a quick study. Another year of training and she could qualify for her license." The revelation that I was learning to pilot helicopters clearly threw my parents off balance. This was yet another aspect of my life they had no knowledge of, another piece of evidence that the daughter they thought they knew had grown into a woman with skills and experiences entirely outside their understanding. We excused ourselves from the table and made our way through the crowd toward the lawn where the helicopter Saturday. As we walked, Nathan was repeatedly stopped by curious guests asking about Skyhawk Aviation and his work. I noticed several of my father's business associates slipping him their cards, clearly interested in potential partnerships or investments. My parents and Madison trailed behind us, their expressions a mix of confusion, annoyance, and most satisfyingly a dawning realization that they had severely misjudged the situation. By the time we reached the helicopter, a small crowd had gathered to admire it. It's a beautiful machine, my father admitted, running a hand along the sleek exterior. What's the range on something like this? As Nathan launched into an explanation of the helicopter's technical specifications, I found myself cornered by my mother and Madison. You could have just told us he was real, Madison hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the nearby guests couldn't hear. I did. Repeatedly. For 2 years, I replied calmly. You chose not to believe me. My mother shook her head, her pearl earrings swaying with the movement. You have to admit, Olivia, the whole situation sounded implausible. A helicopter pilot CEO you met in Alaska who was never available to meet us, it sounded like something from a romance novel. And that was easier to believe than the idea that someone might genuinely love and value me for who I am. The hurt in my voice was impossible to disguise. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine shame in my mother's eyes. That's not fair, Olivia. We've always wanted what's best for you. No, Mom. You've always wanted me to be more like Madison. To want what she wants. To validate your choices by repeating them. That's not the same thing. Madison bristled at being brought into the conversation. Don't blame me for your issues, Olivia. I never told them to doubt you. No, I agreed, you just suggested it, reinforced it, and enjoyed the dynamic it created. You liked being the daughter with the real acceptable relationship, while I was the one with the imaginary fiancé. A commotion from the helicopter drew our attention. Nathan had apparently offered to take my father up for a brief flight, and they were preparing for takeoff. My father, looking both nervous and exhilarated, was being helped into the passenger seat. Is that safe? My mother fretted, momentarily distracted from our confrontation. Nathan has over 1,000 flight hours and a perfect safety record, I informed her. Dad is in better hands with him than with his own corporate pilot. We watched as the rotors began to turn, the distinctive sound washing over the garden party once again. Guests paused their conversations to observe, as the helicopter lifted gracefully into the air, hovered for a moment, and then ascended in a smooth arc over the country club grounds. Show off, Madison muttered, but there was less venom in her voice now. As the helicopter disappeared from view, one of my father's oldest friends approached us, champagne in hand. Remarkable young man, your fiancé, he said to me. Richard seems quite taken with him. Yes, he's very impressive, my mother agreed automatically, her social reflexes kicking in. You must be so proud, Caroline, he continued. Both your daughters engaged to such accomplished men. Different fields, of course, but both clearly at the top of their respective games. I had to suppress a smile as my mother wrestled with this new narrative. For years, she had positioned Madison's life choices as the gold standard, with my alternative path relegated to a cautionary tale. Now suddenly society was viewing both of us as successful, just in different ways. Yes, well, she managed. We've always encouraged the girls to follow their passions. The irony of her statement was so profound that I had to turn away to hide my expression. Madison, sensing that her carefully cultivated position as the family's singular success story was being challenged, excused herself to rejoin Bradley. For the next 20 minutes, as we waited for the helicopter's return, my mother attempted to reconstruct our family history in real time. Suddenly, she had always supported my photography career. She had always been curious about Nathan. The doubts and mockery had never happened, replaced in her revised version with mild maternal concern about my happiness. I let her talk, neither confirming nor challenging her revised history. There would be time for that later. For now, it was enough to watch her struggling to integrate this new reality into her carefully maintained social facade. When the helicopter returned, my father emerged, looking windswept and exhilarated. Incredible, absolutely incredible, he exclaimed, clapping Nathan on the shoulder with newfound camaraderie. The control, the precision, like nothing I've ever experienced. Nathan accepted the praise graciously, but I could see the calculated assessment in his eyes. He understood exactly what was happening. My family wasn't apologizing for their behavior, they were adjusting to a new power dynamic. Their respect wasn't based on recognizing their wrongdoing, but on discovering Nathan's status and capabilities. As the party continued, a subtle but significant shift had occurred. Where before I had been the family embarrassment, I was now being approached by guests curious about my fascinating career in wildlife photography and my adventurous lifestyle. Madison's perfect engagement party had been transformed into a coming-out event for the relationship she and my parents had spent 2 years dismissing. By the time Nathan and I prepared to leave, the damage to my family's previous narrative was complete. My father insisted on exchanging contact information with Nathan to discuss potential opportunities. My mother hugged me with unusual warmth, whispering that we simply must have dinner soon to catch up properly. Madison maintained her distance, but Bradley sought out Nathan for a private conversation that left him looking thoughtful and slightly humbled. As we walked back toward the helicopter for our departure, Nathan squeezed my hand. "Ready for part 2?" he asked quietly. I nodded, knowing that today's dramatic entrance was only the beginning of setting things right with my family. The real conversations, the honest ones about trust, respect, and authentic relationships were still to come. "Let's go home," I replied, feeling strangely light despite the emotional intensity of the day. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground with my family and refused to accept their dismissal of my reality. Whether or not they truly understood the hurt they had caused, they could no longer deny the life I had built for myself. As Nathan helped me into the helicopter and took his place in the pilot's seat, I looked back at the country club. My family stood on the terrace watching us prepare for takeoff. Their expressions were unreadable from this distance, but their posture, attentive, focused entirely on us, told me everything I needed to know. The engine roared to life, the rotors began their rhythmic beating of the air, and we lifted off the ground. As we rose above the manicured lawns and elegant buildings, I felt a sense of freedom and vindication that had been years in the making. "Where to now?" Nathan asked through the headset. I smiled, looking forward rather than back. "Anywhere as long as it's with you." The week following Madison's engagement party was surprisingly quiet. I had expected an immediate fallout, angry phone calls, defensive text messages, perhaps even a family meeting called to discuss what had happened. Instead, there was silence, which was more unnerving than any confrontation would have been. Nathan returned to Alaska for a scheduled contract negotiation, promising to be back within days. Being alone with my thoughts gave me time to process everything that had happened at the party. The initial satisfaction of proving my family wrong had begun to fade, replaced by more complex emotions. I hadn't just exposed their disbelief. I'd publicly challenged the family hierarchy and narrative they'd maintained for years. On the 4th day of silence, my phone rang with my father's number. I answered with trepidation, unsure whether to expect anger or continued denial. "Olivia," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wonder if you might be available for lunch today. Just the two of us." I agreed, surprised by the request. My father and I hadn't had a one-on-one meal in years, not since I'd announced my decision to pursue photography instead of joining his firm after college. We met at a small bistro downtown, away from the usual haunts of his business associates. He was already seated when I arrived, looking older and more tired than I remembered from the party. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing briefly as I took my seat. This formality, so typical of him in business settings, felt strange applied to his own daughter. After we ordered, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "I owe you an apology, Olivia, a significant one." The directness of his statement caught me off guard. My father wasn't known for admitting mistakes. "The way your mother and I, and yes, Madison too, treated your relationship with Nathan was inexcusable. We didn't just doubt you. We mocked you. We turned what should have been a source of happiness into something painful." He looked down at his untouched water glass. "I've been trying to understand why we did that. I waited, giving him space to continue his unexpected self-reflection. I think he said slowly, we couldn't reconcile the daughter we thought we were raising with the woman you've become. Every choice you made that diverged from our expectations, your career, your travels, your relationship, we interpreted as rejection of our values rather than an expression of your own. His candor left me momentarily speechless. This level of insight wasn't something I'd expected from my father, who typically dealt with emotional matters by ignoring them entirely. When Nathan arrived at the party, it wasn't just that we were proven wrong about his existence, he continued. We were confronted with undeniable evidence that your life, this life we didn't understand or approve of, was actually successful on its own terms. That's been difficult to process. I tried to tell you, I said, finding my voice at last. For years I tried to share my life with you and Mom and Madison. You weren't interested unless it fit your narrative. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. You're right, and I can't change that history. But I'd like to try to do better moving forward if you'll give me that chance. The conversation that followed was the most honest one I'd had with my father in my adult life. He asked about my photography, showing genuine curiosity about my recent projects. He inquired about Nathan's company and our relationship, listening attentively to stories he'd previously dismissed. By the time our food arrived, something fundamental had shifted between us. Your mother wants to speak with you as well, he mentioned, as we were finishing our meal. She's having a harder time admitting her role in all this, but she will. Give her time. I agreed to meet with my mother the following day. Our conversation was more strained than the one with my father. My mother oscillated between genuine remorse and attempts to justify her behavior, but it was a start. She promised to make more effort to understand my choices rather than judge them by her standards. Madison proved to be the most resistant to change. When I finally spoke with her a week after the party, her primary concern was still the way Nathan's arrival had overshadowed her engagement celebration. Do you have any idea how many people were talking about your helicopter stunt instead of my engagement? She demanded over coffee at her favorite upscale cafe. About as many as have heard you call my fiancé imaginary over the past 2 years, I countered. She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I might have gone too far with that, she admitted reluctantly. But you have to admit your relationship sounded made up. A helicopter pilot in Alaska, who you never brought home. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to believe your sister, I said firmly. Family is meant to trust each other, not tear each other down. Madison was silent for a moment, stirring her latte absently. I've always been jealous of you, she finally said so quietly. I almost missed it. Jealous of me, I couldn't hide my astonishment. You're the golden child, Madison. The successful lawyer with the perfect fiancé and Mom and Dad's unconditional approval. What could you possibly be jealous of? She looked up, her expression unusually vulnerable. Your freedom. Your courage to live life on your terms. Do you think I wanted to be a corporate lawyer? I wanted to practice environmental law, but Dad made it clear that wouldn't meet his expectations. So I compromised. I always compromise. The revelation stunned me. All these years I'd seen Madison as the willing embodiment of our parents' values, not as someone who had sacrificed her own dreams to meet their expectations. Why didn't you ever say anything? I asked. She shrugged, defensive again. What would be the point? We can't all be rebels, Olivia. Someone had to be the responsible daughter. Our conversation ended on an uneasy truce. Madison wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in undermining my relationship, but a door had been opened that might eventually lead to a more authentic sisterhood. When Nathan returned from Alaska, I shared these conversations with him. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. It sounds like progress, he said cautiously. Do you think it's genuine? I considered the question seriously. With my father, yes. He's never been one for false apologies or emotional performances. With my mother, I think she's trying in her way. Madison is the wild card. There's more going on with her than I realized. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. Families are complicated. It's easy to get locked into roles and narratives that stopped making sense long ago. Speaking of families, I said, changing the subject, my parents have invited us to dinner next weekend. They want to properly welcome you to the family. I made air quotes around my mother's phrasing. We don't have to go if you don't want to. Nathan smiled, taking my hand. Of course we'll go. This isn't just about proving them wrong, Olivia. It's about building something better going forward. The dinner with my parents the following weekend was surprisingly pleasant. My mother had prepared Nathan's favorite Alaskan salmon dish, after discreetly asking me for his preferences. My father showed genuine interest in Nathan's business expansion plans. There were awkward moments. Old habits don't disappear overnight, but the malicious undercurrent that had characterized previous family gatherings was noticeably absent. As the weeks passed, small but significant changes continued. My mother began asking to see my photography portfolio and even framed one of my prints for her office. My father introduced Nathan to several business contacts who could help with Skyhawk Aviation's East Coast expansion. Madison remained the most distant, but even she made occasional efforts, including us in smaller pre-wedding events that previously might have forgotten to invite me. 3 months after the helicopter incident, Nathan and I announced our own wedding date, choosing a small ceremony in Alaska where we had first met. To my surprise, my family not only accepted this non-traditional choice but embraced it. My father arranged for private transportation for extended family members. My mother volunteered to help coordinate East Coast vendors with Alaskan ones. Even Madison offered to use her extensive planning experience to help with logistics. The most telling moment came when my mother asked during a wedding planning session if I would consider using her veil for the ceremony. It's been in the family for generations, she explained. I always assumed Madison would wear it first, but, well, your wedding is first, and traditions are meant to adapt, aren't they? The question represented more than just a piece of tulle and lace. It was an acknowledgement that my path, though different from the one she had envisioned for me, was valid and worthy of family traditions. I'd be honored, I told her, and meant it. As Nathan and I finalized our wedding plans, I reflected on the dramatic shift in my family dynamics over the past months. The helicopter entrance at Madison's engagement party had been a catalyst, forcing a confrontation that was long overdue. But the real change had come in the quiet conversations afterward, in the small daily choices to listen rather than dismiss, to support rather than undermine. The night before we left for Alaska for our wedding, I received an unexpected text from Madison. I know I haven't always been the sister you deserved, but I'm working on it. Can't wait to see you get your happy ending tomorrow. You've earned it. It wasn't a complete resolution. Family healing rarely comes in neat, perfect packages, but it was a promise of continued growth. Sometimes I realized the most satisfying revenge isn't about proving others wrong. It's about creating space for everyone to become better versions of themselves. The Alaskan wilderness provided a breathtaking backdrop for our wedding day. Snow-capped mountains towered in the distance, their majesty reflected in the crystal-clear lake beside our outdoor venue. Wildflowers in vibrant purples and blues dotted the meadow where we placed a simple wooden arch adorned only with native plants and a sheer white fabric that billowed gently in the mountain breeze. I had worried about how my family would adjust to the rustic setting, so different from the formal country club events they preferred. To my surprise and delight, they embraced the experience wholeheartedly. My father abandoned his usual tailored suits for appropriate outdoor wear, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. My mother, initially concerned about the unpredictable weather, found herself enchanted by the natural beauty surrounding us. "This place is magical, Olivia," she admitted as she helped me prepare in the small cabin that served as our bridal suite. "I understand now why you love it here." As she carefully pinned her family veil to my hair, I caught her wiping away a tear. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see you, really see you," she said softly. "Your father and I were so caught up in our vision of what success should look like that we missed the amazing woman you were becoming." The genuine emotion in her voice moved me more than any elaborate apology could have. "We all played our parts," I acknowledged. "I could have tried harder to help you understand my choices, instead of just expecting you to accept them." She squeezed my hand. "That's not on you, sweetheart. Parents are supposed to accept their children unconditionally. We failed at that, but we're learning." Madison entered the cabin, then stunning in her maid of honor dress. Her relationship with me was still healing, but she had thrown herself into her role with surprising enthusiasm, handling countless details, and stepping in whenever stress threatened to overwhelm me. "The guests are all seated," she announced. "And Nathan's parents are absolutely lovely. His mother just showed Dad how to identify some local bird species, and I think he's completely smitten with her expertise." The image of my status-conscious father being tutored by Nathan's mother, a woman who ran a modest bed and breakfast and knew every bird in Alaska by its call, made me laugh. The worlds were colliding, but in ways I never could have anticipated. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Nathan and I had written our own vows, promises that spoke to the unconventional but deep connection we shared. As we exchanged rings with the mountains bearing witness, I looked out at our gathered loved ones. Nathan's rugged Alaskan friends sat alongside my parents' East Coast connections. His parents, unpretentious and warmly genuine, had formed an unexpected bond with mine. At the reception held in a beautifully renovated old barn, my father surprised everyone by delivering a toast that showed just how far he had come in understanding my choices. When Olivia chose a path so different from what her mother and I had envisioned, he began, glass raised. We foolishly saw it as rejection rather than growth. We measured her choices against our narrow definition of success, rather than by the joy and purpose they brought her. He turned to face Nathan and me directly. Today, seeing my daughter so completely in her element, surrounded by the beauty she captures through her lens, and standing beside a man who values her exactly as she is, I understand that success isn't a single path but a million different journeys toward authenticity. His words brought tears to my eyes. This was validation I had stopped expecting years ago, arriving now as a gift rather than the approval I had once desperately sought. The celebration continued late into the evening, with dancing under strings of twinkling lights, and conversations that flowed easily between the different circles of our lives. I found Madison sitting alone at one point, watching the festivities with an unreadable expression. "Everything okay?" I asked, joining her. She nodded, then hesitated. "I've been thinking a lot about courage lately. Your kind of courage to live authentically even when it's difficult." "What brought this on?" Madison twisted her engagement ring absently. "Bradley and I had a serious talk last week. I told him I don't want to continue in corporate law after the wedding. I want to pursue environmental law like I originally planned." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "How did he take it?" "Better than I expected. He said he fell in love with me, not my career path." She smiled ruefully. "I've been so afraid of disappointing everyone that I've been disappointing myself for years." I squeezed her hand. "That sounds familiar. I'm sorry for how I treated you and Nathan," she said suddenly. "I was jealous of your freedom, and instead of admitting that I tried to make you feel like your choices were invalid. That was wrong of me." The directness of her apology, free from qualifications or excuses, felt like the closing of an old wound. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It means a lot." "So," she said, her expression lightening, "does this mean you'll help me break the news to Mom and Dad about my career change?" I laughed. "Absolutely. But you might be surprised. I think they've learned some lessons recently about accepting their daughter's choices." As the celebration wound down, Nathan found me near the barn doors, where I'd stepped out to capture a few final photographs of the spectacular sunset, painting the mountains in gold and crimson. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned into him, considering the question seriously. "More than happy. At peace, I think. For the first time in my adult life, I don't feel torn between being true to myself and maintaining connections with my family." "Your father pulled me aside earlier," Nathan mentioned. "He apologized again for doubting your relationship with me, said he hopes I don't hold it against him." "And do you?" I asked, curious. Nathan shook his head. "Families are complicated. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is the willingness to recognize them and grow." He kissed my temple softly. "Besides that, helicopter entrance was pretty satisfying." I laughed, turning in his arms to face him. It was worth every second of planning just to see their faces. But I'm glad we didn't stop there, that we pushed through to something real. "Speaking of real," Nathan said, his expression turning more serious, "there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." Skyhawk Aviation received an offer to expand operations to include wildlife conservation work, aerial surveys, tracking endangered species, supporting research teams in remote areas. My heart quickened. This had been a dream we'd discussed casually, but never pursued seriously. "That sounds perfect for us. It would mean establishing a new base, possibly in the Pacific Northwest, to split the difference between Alaska and your family on the East Coast. We'd be building something new together, combining my aviation expertise with your wildlife photography and conservation interests." The vision he was painting resonated deeply with everything I valued: meaningful work, connection to nature, partnership with the man I loved, and yes, maintaining the healing bonds with my family. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do," I told him truthfully. As we rejoined our wedding guests for the final dances of the evening, I marveled at how completely my life had transformed since Madison's engagement party. What began as a moment of vindication, my fake fiancé arriving in spectacular fashion to prove my family wrong, had evolved into something far more valuable: authentic relationships based on mutual respect, rather than conformity to expectations. My mother caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass in a private toast. I returned the gesture, acknowledging the journey we'd taken together. My father was deep in conversation with Nathan's father, their different worlds finding unexpected common ground. Madison and Bradley were dancing, her expression lighter than I'd seen it in years. This, I realized, was the true happy ending, not the dramatic helicopter moment that had started it all, but the quiet transformation that followed. We had all been forced to confront the roles we'd been playing and the narratives we'd clung to. In letting go of those limitations, we'd discovered versions of ourselves and each other that were more complex, more authentic, and ultimately more worthy of love. As Nathan led me onto the dance floor for the last song, surrounded by the people who mattered most to both of us, I knew that the most valuable lesson wasn't about revenge or even vindication. It was about the courage to live truthfully, and the grace to allow others the space to do the same. Sometimes the most powerful response to being misunderstood isn't proving others wrong, it's creating a life so authentically yours that it inspires others to question their own limitations. My family had ridiculed my fake fiancé until he arrived in a helicopter, but the real miracle wasn't his dramatic entrance. It was the healing and growth that followed when we all stopped playing our assigned roles and started seeing each other clearly for the first time. As the music played, and Nathan held me close, I whispered a silent thank you to the universe for the journey that had brought us here. Complications, heartaches, helicopter entrances, and all. Wow, what a journey this has been. I want to thank each and every one of you who stayed with me through this entire story. If you've ever had to stand your ground with family who couldn't see your truth, I hope this gave you some encouragement. Has anyone in your family ever completely misjudged someone you loved? Or have you experienced that sweet karma moment when the truth finally came out? I'd absolutely love to hear your stories in the comments below. This video took me weeks to create, so if you enjoyed it, please hit that like button. It truly helps more than you know. And if you want more stories about family dynamics, sweet revenge, and finding your authentic path, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this with someone who needs to hear that standing in their truth is worth it even when family doesn't get it. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to being misunderstood isn't proving others wrong, it's living so authentically that you inspire everyone around you to question their own limitations. See you in the next video.